So I come up here a lot, but this is also like a lot more direct attention than I'm used to. I feel like nobody is like looking back there during worship, and I can just dance like an idiot, and it's fine. I'm like a little nervous to have so much attention on me, but in Elder Lance and Elder Rhoda's Bible study, I picked a declaration for myself. It was something that I felt led to do, and it was, may I be more open with God's people. And I think the response that I got from them confirmed that this was something that the Lord wanted for me. So I'm going to pray. This prayer I wrote a few days ago, and I feel like God has already answered a lot of my confusion. I said, Lord, I know that my overarching goal on the altar should be to glorify you, but sometimes I feel like I'm just really at a loss for what that means in terms of what I should do or how I should behave. I feel like I don't know how to do that, and then I will like stutter in life because I'm very afraid I would make the wrong decision and then you would like have regret, and that makes me feel like just, it upsets me like a lot. And I want to admit that, God, in front of you, and also I want to admit it in front of your people because I believe that the shame that I feel sometimes because of all the things in my life that I am not or I don't have doesn't compare, and I've seen that, to the beauty of how you, God, respond to me whenever I'm willing to expose my vulnerability before you. So if there's anything I discuss that is like more difficult, painful, or embarrassing, in some sense that's actually like even better, because like between me and you, but also in front of everybody, but really between me and you, I know that you, God, will understand the seriousness of my intent to make an offering to you. So then, with all that like said, I ask you, Lord, to grease the wheels for me, to make this testimony fluid and coherent, and may, it all add up to a picture of you that tells the truth about who you are, which is a beautiful person who has been like worth everything. So I want to help people get to know me better, so they can feel more comfortable with me. I'm like extremely private, and I like don't say a lot about myself. I want to be transparent about all the things that I've struggled with and the things that I still struggle with. And a big part of this is like that I understand that other people also can feel ashamed of things that it turns out many people have in common. And I don't want people to feel isolated or lonely or like they're privately like inferior because of things that like maybe, really common. I'm not the first to let my guard down, but I do hope that it helps. I'm 39. I came to the church about 4 years and 3 months ago. I actually haven't really been here that long. Sometimes I also feel shocked that it's only been that time. Sometimes it feels like stuff can move slow and then suddenly fast. Professionally, I am a software engineer, so I'm very like technical and sometimes terse as a person. I live with the assistant pastors and I work from home. I play the piano on the worship team. I arrange flowers with beloved Candace for holidays and revivals. So that's what I do. I will try to like tell a story about my life that makes sense. I like to start with the past because it builds understanding. So like I even look at my parents and the life they had. I feel like understanding is so critical for like helping me to like walk in forgiveness, and like that's something that's been hard for me. So like it is a huge blessing to me that God would give me the capacity to understand. It's not something that you can just try hard and get, right? Like it is a gift from heaven. It's grace. I have it, and suddenly my life is like, hasn't changed on the outside, but it has. And that is a miracle. I was like crying. I was like, that's a miracle, My grandfather on my mom's side was a police officer, and he was very violent. My mom doesn't talk about it, except that she says, when her parents finally got divorced, she said it was like the house itself breathed a sigh of relief. My grandmother was extremely religious, and she spent a lot of time at church, I think probably to escape him, but she left the kids at home alone, so they were very neglected. My mom experienced a lot of neglect, and her older brother was abusive, and her mother, my grandmother, like did not intervene or establish accountability. Things on my dad's side were actually like a lot worse. My dad's father was also violent, but he was sadistic, which means that like, instead of like, I'm upset, I'm lashing out, it's like, you have upset me, therefore I'm going to cause you pain and show you like that I'm enjoying it. And this is kind of like a family trait for us. So he was like this, and he was also negligent. There's this story that my aunt told me at my dad's funeral. She said when my youngest sister broke her arm, she brought it to like her dad and was like, oh, like, you know, I need to go to the doctor. And he was like, nah, you're fine. And then Francine, who was like, I think the oldest sibling, had a job at that time and just took her to the emergency room to get a cast. Like, at some point he had actually even taken a position as a pastor. And it was obviously like for his personal benefit. Like he was not a great guy. He died, I think, when he was 41. The men on my dad's side, they rarely make it to 50. So both of my parents were in these bad domestic situations. They got married when my mom was 17 and my dad was 20. Had the first kid, my older brother, when my mom was 18. My dad was working at these petroleum refineries. They had them all over the city of Houston in Texas. It like Houston is very much like, in part at least, a petroleum city. And there are a lot of people that get these jobs and they get paid pretty well, and it's blue collar work. You don't need to have like too much education, and you can get paid really well, buy a house and have a family. My dad was pulling long graveyard shifts. They were maybe like 12 hours. It messed up his sleep. He went to the doctor. They gave him some sleep medication, and my mom said this kind of woke something up in him. He was with her suddenly like so violent sometimes that she was like afraid that he was going to kill her. And she had told me some stories. When I was 3, I remember her like locking me and my older brother in his room, and I could see that she was like really afraid. She was like deathly quiet when she was speaking. My youngest brother, who was a baby, I don't even know where he was. That is when my mom told my dad that she was getting a divorce, and he had a gun, and he, I think, was going to kill her, and then he backed down. And so then the police came, and it was kind of chaotic. He ended up only spending a night in jail because nothing actually happened except the threat. My younger brother, Bryce, actually married this woman who her grandparents had a similar story, but the grandfather didn't back down. He actually killed the grandmother. And so like, I thought it was like so interesting sometimes to me, like how we kind of are seeking each other out and like repeating patterns. It's something that kind of like boggles me a little bit. So parents got divorced when I was young. My mom started dating somebody else who was like stable, more or less. He was kind of cruel to me privately, and then after she had kids with him, he felt, I think, more free to behave badly, like around the whole family. We like moved to Minnesota because he was itinerant and he would start new businesses. And so we had moved to Oklahoma. I think my mom wanted to get us away from my dad. And then we moved to Minnesota when I was around 10 to be closer to him. And that was during El Nino. It was like some of the 3 most like hostile years of my life. The temperature outside was like regularly like negative 18. We lived on a lake because like Minnesota is like the land of 10,000 lakes. There's lakes everywhere. And so the wind chill was like negative 60. And it was just like, at that point, it's like, that number doesn't even make sense. It's like, just don't go outside. And this is a time when like, a lot of things were escalating in my family. My dad at some point had like discovered cocaine, and he still had visitation rights, so we spent about a month with him a year. When he was high, to me, he was like, you know, like when Pastor Steve is like Jekyll and Hyde, I was like, oh, that like fits my dad like so well, because when he was sober, he could be like tender and affectionate and like very loving. And then he could become like really malicious and like cruel and frightening. He had like crossed the line with me physically. He's the one who introduced me to porn when I was a kid. He took showers with me. There are other things too. When this happened, like I often felt really frozen. It was like I wanted to leave, but I was afraid of his anger because like if you hurt his feelings, he'd get really mad. So what I would do is I just kind of like sit there and have no reactions. And what I found out is that like a lot of people in life lose interest in continuing like to do things that maybe they know they shouldn't do when they don't get a response. He crossed the line with me emotionally. I think this is really common, where he kind of just put a lot of emotional burdens on me that really should have belonged to like an adult wife. When he was taking cocaine, he would hallucinate and he had a rifle. He used to sit in his bathroom and he would like watch out the window. He had these paranoid delusions that somebody was, or like a group of people were trying to rob his house. He had like invited me into his bathroom and showed me his cocaine stash and talked to me about his perch. And I was really struck because I had like realized that he was pointing his gun at the place where I really like to play in the yard. And it just kind of was like this moment where like, it is a really good representation of how I was like afraid a lot that like my dad would accidentally kill me. And I was like, I know you would regret it like when you got sober, but I was like, that kind of doesn't really help me much. So like, so I felt, I think from like a pretty young age, I was like, I had this weird tension of like, hey, you know, like I know you love me. I think you might kill me. I don't really trust you. I kind of need you though. And I struggled like so long, you know, not just as a child, but as an adult with my own emotions, because as a child, I craved relationship with my father. And I was also, you know, I was afraid he would kill me. And I was unable, I think, to distinguish between it is natural for someone to like desire love and affection from their dad versus like, you know, something happened because I wanted it to, or like there's something wrong with me, or even like feelings of like, you know, hey, I let myself be abused over and over again, like I'm disgusting. So my dad like disappeared when I was 12 and I didn't know if he was alive or like what had happened. And my mom at this time was kind of like more or less in fugue states. She would kind of move through the house like a ghost. She wasn't verbally responsive. My younger brother was like sleepwalking. I was having sleep paralysis. It was just a weird, unpleasant time. My stepdad's bad behavior started escalating. He was drinking a lot. My mom and him were fighting. It was difficult for me to like spend 8 years living with him because he like very much like enforced like, there are two levels of like our family. There were like my mom and his kids, and then there were like the ones who were not. And there were, you know, like furniture, there's furniture that like I couldn't sit on, and like, you know, some rooms were only for them. And when we lived in Minnesota, like he built another room on the house, and they put in like a nice TV and a big couch, and they had like a roaring fireplace. And I would see my mom and my stepdad and my half siblings would go in, and they would sit together as a family, and they would like cuddle and watch movies. And I would be like in the house where it was like 65 and it was dark. And it was like really, it hurt me a lot. I struggled, I think, feeling like these feelings like, oh, like, you know, it's not really my house. Like, you know, I don't really belong here. That sucked. My older brother was like escalating from delinquency into like criminal behavior. Too much to talk about. Got my eye on the clock. I got bullied a lot at school that age, and I was like super bewildered about like why. And so a big part of the suffering for me was like, I don't understand what I did that has caused people to hate me. And so like I'd spent a lot of time thinking about it because I was like lonely. I would think somebody was my friend, and I would find out that they had actually pretended to befriend me because they had intended to humiliate me by deceiving me and telling me that in front of others. And stuff like that would happen. People like spit in my food, and I got harassed a lot. I used to like go to the school library to like just have a quiet place where I could read, and then the librarian like would be like watching me and even low-key following me around, and she had like the library closed to students at lunchtime, and I was like, are you like, is your intent to like help people read or to stop them? I was like what's up? It's like, I was making a lot of problems quietly sitting there. I found adults to be like really irritating sometimes, honestly. Like I was taking care of a lot of my own business, and I was like, you like need to learn how to be functional. My older brother participated in the bullying. He used to sometimes call my friends and he would say things to them. I have no idea what he said. They were no longer my friends. Then he would come and make fun of me and be like, you don't have any friends. And I was like, thank you. He had convinced a boy on the bus to like jump on me and scream something like, hey, stop sucking my dick. And I was just sitting there. I was like so shocked. I was like, oh, he's like a nice guy. I had told my mom, and I'd seen my brother was like laughing. And then I found out later from this kid, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Your brother told me that you would like it. And I was like, okay, like he's just, my brother was very difficult for me. I kind of like did my best to leave him alone. When my dad disappeared, we stopped getting child support. My stepdad also ran out of money. We experienced like food insecurity for a while. It was stressful for me. I felt like my parents weren't like on it. So I would be kind of like calculating. I'd be like, okay, like this is how much, this is how much longer this food will last. Or like, I spent a lot of my childhood kind of like figuring out like, I know my mom has a hard time saying no. So like, what do I really need to ask for? Like things like that. And then I'd be frustrated with my younger siblings who like were kind of like not aware of the situation, and they would just kind of like ask for things and they would get it. And I'd be like, well, now we're in credit card debt and this is like causing us a lot of instability. And I knew it wasn't their fault. And I was like, this whole situation frustrated me a lot. It's a lot of pressure. My stepdad like started doing things like he would like go buy his own food while we were like unable to afford food or gas to like get out of the house to go into town and buy food. And like, that really struck me. I think having my dad like abandon me and then him do stuff like that for me like really created a feeling of worthlessness. I was like, the reason that this happens to me is because I have no value. And at the same time, I was doing really well in school. I was very good at math and science, but I'd actually like in middle school in the state of Minnesota tested so high on reading and like verbal reasoning that they actually could not calibrate my level. So they were like, you're somewhere in college. And I was 12. And I was like, oh my gosh, these words make me feel good about myself. Do you have more words? Like, please speak these words. That was nice. And I think I began to realize that like some of the bullying might have actually been motivated by either jealousy or I had like maybe accidentally made somebody feel stupid. And I had like rejected this idea for a long time because I thought it was like so ludicrous. And I was like, I mean, like, do you want to trade? Like I just didn't, I couldn't figure it out, but people are complicated. At this time, this plan began to formulate in me when I was pretty young. I was like very like strategic, that I was going to get a scholarship and I was going to go to an elite college and then I'd be financially independent from my family. There's many steps of reasoning here. Scholarship, good college, financial independence, better earning potential. No one can force me to be abused. And I was like, that's my plan. And so that's actually like what I did. My mom and Richard split when I was 13. We lived in an RV for a couple of years. There was like 5 or 6 of us. I didn't like that. I got my own bedroom, like I think when I was a senior in high school, when I was the end of my freshman year in high school, and that was like fantastic. My mom wanted to reward me for my hard work in school, and so we like made a weird trip to Mexico with her boyfriend and bought a cheap van. And I was like, it was miserable, and I was like, now I have a van. And I had like a big laundry basket full of books in the back seat. It would just slide around because it just had so much body roll. It's definitely not my driving. When I was 14, my dad showed up out of nowhere. He wanted to make amends. My mom started getting out of bed and she got a job, and I was really relieved. I had realized when I was the end of my sophomore year that like I was kind of coasting because like I was smart, so I wasn't working as hard as other people, and therefore I didn't really know what I was capable of, and I had made a decision to stop doing that. My dad died. Just threw a big wrench in my plans. I was super single-minded in that time because it was like all that I could handle. I was like, I still have to do this so I can make it out. I would have like kind of ridiculous arguments. This is an example. My mom told me to forge her name on absence notes because she didn't want to write it. School got mad at me. I was like, you have to get mad at my mom. It's not my fault. They got mad at her. She got mad at them. I was like, that's fine. I got some pushback though from like an administrator who was like, hey, you missed a lot of days of school. We're not going to let you graduate. And I was like a little frustrated because I was like, I get it that like Texas has laws, but like I moved from 20 to number 2 in my class of 600 people, like in the middle of like grieving a parent death, and like you're telling me that like my attendance is the critical issue when I've clearly proven that it was not actually necessary. And so this was like my personality as a teenager, and I was learning like you kind of have to like you cannot just say this to like people in authority unless you have like a relationship. And so I would have like these different interactions, and I'd be like, you know what, I think you are sometimes, and I think I was right, you are enforcing this rule just to be petty and show me that you can. And if that's what you want to do, what I'm going to do for you is check some boxes, and then I'm going to bypass you. And that's kind of like what I did a lot in my life. And I think it seemed to me at that age that a lot of my authorities, including parents and family members, were low-key trying to sabotage me. And I was like, okay, there's no value in me trying to like resolve this with you. Therefore, I'm going to just leave. When I think right before I left for college, I discovered and told my mom that my brother was sneaking underage girls into my sister's bedroom to have sex with them at like 4 a.m, and she like started fighting with him, and then she let my name slip, and I just heard him screaming, and I was just sitting there, and I just got up and I like started running, and I turned around and grabbed my keys. I'm like, praise God, because I cannot run faster than my brother. And I locked myself in the car, and he was like, I don't know, going crazy. And I was like, it is so easy to break glass. And I was sitting there like, why can't you understand that it's really easy to break glass? Like, and it was just this weird, I was like, some kind of like, I don't know if that was like a miracle or what. I'm like, it's you just break it. But like I was locked in my car in the front yard for a long time, and it was the summertime in Texas, and it was hot, and I was upset with her. I was like, hey, you threw me under the bus, and then you didn't even come and tell me when you left. And I was like, I'm dehydrated, I'm like shaking, like, hey. And this is kind of characteristic of like what it could be like with my mom. So I went to Stanford. I don't also want to give you a false impression. I also very much love my mom. But there were some problems. I went to Stanford, and I had like a lot of really beautiful experiences, and also like a lot of really difficult ones. And it was interesting because they paid all my rent. They paid for my money, or for my food. They paid, for everything. And so like all I kind of really had to worry about was school. And in like this like environment that was actually like pretty secure, I saw a lot of stuff was coming up, and that was probably because I felt safe. Where am I? 36 minutes. Okay. Let's skip that. I had a pastor, my family's very religious. They believe things like women shouldn't be managers at jobs because it's like unbiblical for women to have authority over men, like point blank. It was uncomfortable for me when my managers started encouraging me to consider being a manager. I was like, I don't really want to have that conversation. There are other stories. I don't know to what extent my family was actually against the domestic abuse my mom had experienced because of their beliefs. It was difficult for me to differentiate. I was like, oh, who is God? Because they seem crazy, but I just don't know. And I was in school, and I had wanted to ask this question, what would it be like to have a relationship with God where I'm not under the influence of my family? And I had some bad experiences. I ran into a pastor that I used to have like the most mind-bending conversations with, and I kind of like, there was something about him like that reminded me so much sometimes of my older brother, and I was like, getting such bad vibes, and I low-key think he might be like a sociopath, and I think he was. I ran into him a few years later when I was in grad school. He had basically like poached one or two of the students from the Bible study who were just so clearly like outstanding engineers, and he had kind of like attached himself to them, and they had done a startup together. They were acquired by Yahoo for like 7 figures, and he had like left the ministry, and he was like just living a very good life. And I was like, okay, like I was personally upset because I felt like my feeling was like that those students had been taken advantage of. Like I was like, oh, they trusted you, and I think that's not where, maybe you were supposed to go. I had a job. I don't have time, skipping it. I didn't date really until the end of college. I was busy. I had, finally, I think when I was like 22, I had a 1.5-year relationship with a guy that I met when I moved in with a friend who'd been on staff with me when I was at Stanford. It was funny because I actually didn't like him when I met him, and then he would like needle me to get reactions out of me, and I think it's because he found it irritating that I like didn't respond. And one day, like he pushed me over the edge, and I clapped back on him in front of all his friends, and I was like, I clearly won this argument. And when I looked at his face, I saw that he like found that attractive, and it surprised me because I didn't expect that. And so I like became more open-minded about him. But the interesting thing is that like I see in my history, like I have actually dated a lot of Jewish people, and I think that part of that is that like they are attracted to like smart women, and a lot of people aren't. And of course it's like nice when people think you're attractive. I went back to grad school. That relationship ended. That was really hard on me. But I kept going. I think I had realized, I had been very unsure about whether I wanted a family, and had realized, I think at that age, that I did. So I continued, and I started a new relationship when I was in grad school with somebody, and that one was very different because I think I had been very clear up front about like what I was looking for and like what I was agreeing to, and that when that relationship ended a little more than a year and a half later, I was like, oh, you kind of didn't tell me the truth. And that one like hurt me really bad. I was like, I didn't realize even for many years that I was like really devastated. He lived with this really nice, wealthy couple in Menlo Park. It was actually West Menlo Park, which is right next to Atherton. And I was like, I understand, like the sense of like altered reality you can feel sometimes when you go to places like that. These people that he lived with were like elders at their church. They appeared to be very dignified and upstanding people. One day, Adam told me he got home and he caught Jim, the man, right, drowning squirrels in his swimming pool. And then he like had realized he got caught, and he said to Adam that if the squirrel escaped, he would let it live. Otherwise, I don't know, it was like it deserved to die. I was like, okay. And Adam was really upset. And I was like, I'm so sorry that like you had to experience that. To me, this was actually like, I don't have time to tell you like how common this experience would be of me like sometimes trying to connect like with people in churches and then being like, okay, like, you know what? I'm sorry. Like, all right, that was a mistake. Okay. I always smelled weed in their backyard too, and I think I'm not from California. Like I am actually from Texas, and sometimes like those values manifest in me in strange ways, and it always felt so like hypocritical to me that like I could smell like weed like in a thick cloud throughout like West Menlo Park, and the consideration is, oh, like this is open-minded. It's like, free thinking. And then somewhere else, it's like criminal behavior. And I was like, it definitely feels like there is a certain lack of accountability, depending on where you stand. And I was like, what can I say? Like, I don't, I can't fix that. It bothers me. Breaking up with Adam was devastating. I actually began to ask a lot of questions about myself. Like, for example, is this happening to me because I am not the kind of person who should be trusted to have children? Or like maybe I just shouldn't be married. When I was younger, like our family, we had a lot of physical fights between siblings. I actually think this may have been like a manifestation of like some of my mom's trauma, and she would come after me really hard, and she would call me like really vicious names. She would call me my dad's name. She would say like that I was an abusive person. She would just kind of like unleash on me. And I think like, I remember Elder Daniel was giving like a message, and he was talking about, like these curses that like, like these labels. And I was like, I kind of just knew he was talking about me, but I was like, I don't really understand what he's saying. And I started to understand like that I think I was like okay in life when I was doing well, but then when I was hurt, it was very difficult for me to like separate myself from these beliefs. And I had actually asked God the question, even maybe a year ago. I had walked in the sanctuary and I was like, is the reason that I don't have kids because you thought I would throw them in the fire? And these are like kind of like it doesn't, I can talk about it now. It doesn't hurt that bad. But like, I just had like these really painful beliefs about myself. And I want to like give glory to God who immediately like answered me. Like literally like that second I got an answer. And I was like kind of struck because I was like, wow, it's almost like he was waiting to have the conversation. And I think it's really amazing that like we understand all these things about God. Like he's, high and mighty and he's the king of everything. And he actually even like cared. Like he wanted to talk to me about it. Like he actually wanted to. I'm like, I can't, that's amazing. I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I'd personally feel loyal because you're a big king, but like the fact that you talk to me, like that's different. Let's see. I had a lot of challenges in my career. I think I don't have time to tell you the stories. I feel like I dealt with a lot of like authorities crossing the line with me, and that is a really difficult situation to manage like in the workplace. Like having to report somebody for like, sexual harassment, it becomes complicated because I was like, almost not wanting to get involved, but I was like, hey, I know that, like, for example, when I did it at Stanford, I was like, as a grad student, I was like, I know that we have lost like a lot of promising women candidates because this person has a reputation, but nobody on the faculty seems to be aware that this is an issue, and there continues to be like this like leak in the pipeline. And I knew that a lot of women on my floor felt really intimidated. And when this person finally came after me, I was like, there's a part of me that was like, all right, let's go. I was like, this is too much. I was like, I have all the ammunition I need. He actually was stupid enough to do it in front of a bunch of people in my lab. I reported him. Stanford hired a law firm that investigated. They like quietly asked him to leave. The Stanford Dean of Engineering invited me to his office and just said a bunch of stuff that was like trying to, I could see that he was like trying to be helpful. And I was like, I'm not sure you're like aware of yourself. And there was another woman who was in my lab who had like disliked me and kind of like harassed me. But when I reported him, I like walked to her office and I was like, hey, I just want to let you know that I had a meeting with our advisor and that I reported Mark. And I just walked away. And then like an hour later, I saw her walking out of his office. And like in this moment, when the dean had said something that was like, it got me hot, she kind of just straight up changed the subject. And I was like, wow, that she like really helped me out. I left the PhD at Stanford. That was depressing. I think it was hard for me to like constantly be somewhere where I had broken up with someone that like I had like expectations. Like just having to be there all the time, I was like, it's hard. I was having a lot of short tenures at my job. Basically, like my life was going down. I did a lot of drugs. People gave it to me for free. It's because I used to give people things and I didn't realize, that I was harming anybody, but God will not be mocked. Like you do, reap what you sow. I started having short tenures at my jobs. I was struggling with a lot of depression. I ended up moving back to Texas. I actually tried even dating a woman because I realized that I had lost the emotional capacity to connect with men in a way that would be I could actually marry somebody. And so I was like, I don't want to die alone, so I'm just gonna try. That was a bad decision. I filed bankruptcy in 2019. I think I had reached a point where I was definitely struggling a lot with suicide. I personally have never met a drug dealer that's as dangerous as a psychiatrist who's kind of just experimenting on you. My bankruptcy was approved in August of 2019, and then 2 days later, I had been living in my mom's house. It was very humiliating for me to be okay, I worked so hard in my life to get out of this situation, and here I am. But that's what had happened, and I kind of, had to admit that it was good that at least I had somewhere to land, and she took me and put up with me. 2 days after my bankruptcy kind of cleared, I found out that my mom had been making plans for my older brother to move in with her when he got out of jail, and we didn't know when that was going to happen. So I was okay, I got to bounce. And at this point, I was I'm clearly bad at software, so I'm just going to do something easier. But I could not find a job that was either a lower level or paid less than what I had already been making. And I was I don't really want to have to deal with this pressure, but I have to get out of here. So I took a job and I negotiated a relocation bonus, and then I moved all my stuff to California, and I started, and this is when I was looking for a dog sitter, and I found this lady. She ended up inviting me to her Bible study, and then I kind of knew. I feel in your heart you kind of know. I'm oh, God's, he's coming to talk. He wants to talk about it. Almost against my will, I kind of started asking her questions about stuff that I was upset about. There's this one story in the Bible, when Lot gives up his daughters to protect the angels that are visiting him. And I'd always found that really painful because I was oh, why are they disposable? And I think that's kind of how I experienced my family. It was very interesting for me to learn over time and through experiences with the church, the way that God would probably look at that is more you're not supposed to sacrifice your children to idols, and that he actually is really very firmly opinionated about it. And I did not always see God as a God of justice, and it's God has had so much grace for me when I've been so difficult. I reluctantly agreed to go to this Bible study. I understood there was this inevitable confrontation, and I was okay, I'm just going to go. I already know it's going to happen, so I'm going to just willingly go. I'd done so many things. I'd done homosexuality. I'd done drugs. I didn't mean to. I still ripped people off. I understood at that time that I was forgiven, and I found that amazing. I was oh my gosh, God actually wanted to reestablish relationship with me after all that. That's crazy. And I was just wow. And I threw myself into participating and serving at this church. And I had learned a lot of lessons about actually spiritual authority through the interactions I had there that were confirmed when I came here. That last church was very oriented around spiritual gifts, and they also taught stuff that was not biblical, and I didn't realize that until several months had passed because I had just started reading the Bible. I wanted to align myself with what they were doing and help push it. And so I had asked and gotten approval to participate. And I didn't know, hey, you have to wait some time before you operate in spiritual things, or you're going to be very cursed. And that is what happened to me. towards the end of the time I was at this church, I would experience sometimes mental attacks. So it would be like, I would be in my room, I'd hear my dog having a seizure, I'd run upstairs to catch him, and then when I'd come in, he would just be like laying on the floor fine, and like I was like asking for help. I didn't know why this was happening, and I followed their instructions, and my life just kept getting worse. The church itself was going through a rocky time. They lost a bunch of their elders like around the time that I had like made this decision in my heart that I think I need to leave, and I didn't want to. I was afraid of not having a covering, but it kind of got to the point where I was like, I'm going to die anyway. I have to leave. And so I did, and like, I was still in a really low place, and I actually left really fast because I was like, I think I have to do this, and this is the only way I'm going to make it out. So I blocked everybody, including Quay, and I did not block Elder Doris, and that was, I think, the only person I did not block. Deleted my social media. They were like very entrenched in my social media. I was like, I need to cut you off because otherwise I'm not gonna be able to like stick with this decision to leave. And then I was between churches and I came here. The experience I had with my last pastors for me felt very much like a betrayal. I was like, oh, like you used me, you used my offerings, you used my body, and then like when I ran out, like you threw me in a dumpster. And so I had come here, and I came because an old member brought me, and I pretty much knew within like 2 days that like I was supposed to be here. I was like, all the questions I had been asking God for like 6 months, like I think beloved Pastor Steve answered them in like 15 minutes on the altar. I was like, okay, that's like, you don't really need to be a rocket scientist to like, add these numbers together. And I think I just felt a strong impression that I was supposed to be here. And so like, I knew that I needed to be here. And I also did not want to be here because nothing about anybody, because I had been betrayed a lot of times. And I was like, I just actually kind of want to die sometimes. And when I was going through this, I was kind of a disaster. I don't know if I was even coherent when I was talking to people. I think sometimes I was not. But pastors in the church actually really went out of their way to take care of me. A lot of women came and they helped clean my place when I was like struggling because of like injuries to keep things in order. I was really overwhelmed. My environment was like chaotic and like it was making it even harder for me. It was really nice, first of all, to have this space clean, but I think the more important thing is that I didn't feel like I had anybody, and I had deliberately cut myself off because I was like, this is the only way I can commit. So it was really reassuring for me that people would come over and just do that. I was like, okay, like, I don't feel as afraid anymore. I was over leveraged at that time with my rent. I had actually done it because I wanted to be closer to my church. The funny thing is I live 7 minutes from this church. I was like, it was embarrassing for me to get called out on like my financial irresponsibility, but then God just did it again. But like, I can afford it now. I was like, great, thank you. He actually cared about like what I was trying to do. I was about to lose my job. I was so anxious. I had a really hard time being patient with anything or like enduring because I was very hurt and agitated and distrustful. You can actually watch my old testimonies. I did. It makes me laugh like a lot. All the like talking really fast and stuff that I'm doing now used to be so much worse. I did my best, but like I also, looking back, it's kind of really clear to me how much I like did not believe pastors, and I would treat them sometimes the way I treated people when I was young, of like, I'm gonna check your box and then I'm gonna like do what I think I need to do. And that like had worked for me when people were like illegitimate and not operating the way they were supposed to, but the pastors are actually like people of integrity, and therefore like it just took me a long time to like realize that I don't have to treat their comments that way. And I think I'm honestly still figuring it out, but like it's hard. I'm like, I have a lot of history. I'm up here trying to repent. Takes time. I've noticed actually recently that I sometimes will get a lot of comments from authorities that are like, oh, you worked really hard, or great job, or, I know you tried your best even when I didn't feel that way. And I see that this is giving me a lot of ease, and it's like, the reason that I'm able to be in this place is because of the consistency of church members, especially in leadership, who like treated me a certain way, like regardless of my response. That's, I think, what convinced me ultimately that they were like truthful when I was like, your words are not, sorry, like I'm past the point of believing words. And I finally understand, at least a little bit, that the intended function of authority is to benefit people and help them thrive, and that's why it is a good thing. And that causes me to have buy-in, and I, in my heart, am like, oh yes, I want to uphold this because I see that it was a thing that was established in love. But that would have never been possible without like the steadfastness of people around me. I think it's understood, and I don't think anyone is holding anything against me, but I want to just say I understand how tiring it must have been for many people to have to prove their integrity to me like over and over and over. Like I want to acknowledge that. I want to say thank you. Okay. I'd had this experience after I moved to the church. I had to rehome some pets. There were some rules I needed to agree to. Beloved Sue actually taught me a lot. Just learning like the discipline of cleaning and like techniques and rhythms that make it easy to repeat and incorporate so that you can kind of consistently live a certain way. Having like an organized approach, like just helped me figure out what I needed to do. It was a super huge relief for me, I think at that time, to be in an orderly space. One time, Sue and I were cooking, and I was using the food processor, and I kind of like, there's a part of me that knew I'm like not being careful the way I should, and I had this moment, and I like was just looking at the food processor and how close my fingers were to the blades, and it was like a conversation. It happened internally, and it was just like, do you have all your fingers? And I was like, yes, I have to admit that I'm not dead. I have all my body parts. And it was kind of hard for me to process all the feelings that came up, but I was like very dissociated at the time. I was like, I'm not here right now. Leave me a message. I'm not in a ditch. I think one thing that really strikes me is that I also was never sexually assaulted. And I think, to me personally, it's so amazing because I was never taught to take care of myself, and I did not see myself as worth taking care of. And so even if I had understood it, I wouldn't have done it, and I often have not. But there's so many things that never happened to me. And I think just writing that down and realizing it, just made me cry, because I have in me sometimes so much of fear and concern of safety, but I also maybe sometimes feel old feelings of being helpless to manage that. And for most of my life, we have to make good decisions, but I was not managing, but God was managing. And we have all these stories about the sternness of God. And I'm I was in the church. I came 4 years ago. At that time, I had more or less PTSD that was so bad that I actually couldn't talk to people about what was bothering me. The reason I couldn't do it is even if I even tried, it would trigger flashbacks. And I also took it very seriously. I was I cannot cross the line with authority. That message was super clear to me. And I was it's easier for me to believe in that than it is, honestly, to believe in grace. So I was you know what, I get it. And so I felt very stuck. I kind of just had to endure this for years. There was a time, I think, when we were talking about strongholds. For me, I think the stronghold I encountered was just still a lot of suicide, but also self-loathing. And so I'd had these very strong impulses that I dealt with on a daily basis. And it was I hate myself, I want to die. And then I'd be I'm laying on the beach drinking lemonade. This is really nice. I hate myself, I want to die. I have a really good job. I hate myself, I want to die. And I was like, it's hard for me to like describe. It was like, I know I should be more grateful. And like, it took me time to understand that God was never asking me to deny what was hard, and that I was like accepted and that my feelings were okay. Like I think I just didn't believe that for like a long time. I had gone to this therapist because I knew this was a problem, and like we had discussed it. I was doing something called EMDR. It's like a rapid eye movement technique for people that you use when like you can't talk about things, but you're trying to get relief. She ended up like trying to convince me that this church was abusing me, and I like was so enraged at that point that I had like lost the ability to respond verbally, and I fired the bleep out of that lady, and it hurt a lot. I think I'd felt betrayed. I've had some really amazing blessings, like with jobs here at this church. When I first came, I was told to stick it out at my job where they very much wanted to fire me, which was humiliating because I was like, I think all my coworkers kind of know and I have to face them all the time. And I did not like that. And then they gave me like a ridiculous severance when Pastor Steve told me to ask for it. I used some of that to buy a car. I was at the dealership negotiating with Sue. She's very good at it. Pastor Steve walked in, the whole dynamic changes. You know, people like mess with you, right? They're like, they just keep pushing, trying to do nonsense. And then he walks in and they're like, okay. And I was like, what a blessing that like somebody would do that who can. I felt, you know, to me, like I felt very loved by that. And then it was nice to have a new car too. But I was like, the fact that you came and just did that said a lot to me. I was getting a lot of pressure from beloved Pastor Steve. It was pushing my buttons. When I got my first job here, I ended up calling a recruiter that Pastor Steve had originally told me to turn down because like the instructions had kind of like changed a little bit. And there's a part of me very rigid, which was like a little resentful of like, hey, like, you know, why are you coming after me when like you're the one that told me to reject this job offer? And I think like this is just some kind of tension that we all have to resolve. You know, that was a really good job. And I think at that time I got like a 12% raise. I took this job, things got quiet. I dated people here, I did dances, I read the Bible, did my daily. I continued to suffer a lot from like mental attacks and misery. I understood I have a lot of unforgiveness. I knew it was like my fault because I was the one that was sinning. And yet it had this real hold on me, and I would often feel like a great despair because like I feel like I understood from conversations with the pastors and the messages that like I was supposed to be able to overcome this, but I had not and felt like I could not. And I had kind of reached a point, I think at some point, where I was like just going through the motions. We had started, you know, the Bible study. I was at this time still in a lot of pain, and I had like a lot of rage. And I was also, I think, playing piano and like appearing for some reason to be holding things down. Let's see. I think at some point, so I had, my self-loathing had gotten so bad that like when I was like really attacked, I would just actually start hitting my head like against things. And then later I'd be like, wow, I have a really bad headache and I just feel like bleep. And like, you know, sometimes I'd be like, okay, I'm in Spain and I need to give a talk. And I'm just like, I just have to push through. But it was so intense that like when it would happen, actually couldn't control myself. And the interesting thing is that like, when I would have these moments, like I kind of would see like, even after it had happened, like something had shifted in like my ability to like connect and trust like my authorities. But like, it was just it was a weird, depressing, encouraging time where I was like, something's changing. I'm beating my head against stuff. And I think I finally reached the point where I was actually able to go to the elders and tell them like what was happening. And that was just like it was like, turning on a light. It was a big difference for me. They started like advising me. They were extremely compassionate. I have gone through like I started taking some medication. I was having a lot of issues with like OCD that I didn't understand. Under their advice, I went on this medication. I actually stopped like all self-harm behavior pretty much, I think, within a week. Like a lot of stuff I think is just so, I don't know. It's like the brain chemistry is important. I could not manage to change this, and I was just doing the same thing over and over. Pastor Steve had advised me to go to a sleep doctor. At that time, I was so depressed that I considered it to be a throwaway comment. I didn't listen. Elder Lance said the same thing. I remembered. I went. They diagnosed me with sleep apnea. I understood why I kept waking up at like 3 a.m, like panicking. There was a lot of relief to like get that fixed. Beloved, Pastor Steve made the comment, you think you need deliverance, but you just need more sleep. I was like, it's true. I was weighing this decision to go back on medication. Beloved, Elder Lance sent me a text. If I can paraphrase, it said like, I hate to see you in agony. And I was kind of like afraid. I was like, I don't know if I want to deal with a psychiatrist. But it was like that comment. Like I had interpreted at that time when I was suffering a lot is like how the Lord felt about me. And that's the reason why I move forward. For me, that's been really great. Okay, we have 3 minutes. Under their direction, I started making a lot of changes. I'm seeing a Christian therapist who has helped me understand my behavior and like what are like techniques I can do to resolve my tension. I am like starting a program to do exposure therapy to kind of get at some of the deeper trauma that I have, because I see how much it like is an obstacle for me when I'm like, oh, I'm trying to, live a righteous life. And then I keep running into like this thing. God has been like almost like outrageous with blessing me in so many ways. He's helped me to feel like I should take care of myself. So I do things like go to the doctor. I think after the first job I got here, I went to a second one where I got like a 11% raise. A year later, I was at a job where I got a 15% raise. A year later, a very big bonus came in. That was a 36% raise. So that's kind of like where I am now. I know I didn't give you a lot of context about what happened, but like that's a lot. If the token does well, we'll see. I actually got like a really good performance review. I think this is so interesting because I was such a disaster and people wanted to fire me, and they paid me money so they could fire me. And now people are saying like, they're giving me a lot of money to keep me. In my last review, they had literally no negative feedback at all. They didn't even say something like, hey, this is great, but please, work on this. You could be even better. I was like almost disappointed because I was like, well, what am I supposed to, give me a target so I can run after it. I really enjoy having reached a point where I have the trust and autonomy at work to like just take care of stuff. Like they kind of like don't interfere a lot. Therefore, if I see a problem, I have keys to like all of our production systems and I can just decide to fix it. It feels really good for me because I know that I worked hard and I cried many tears and I saw that God was right and that suffering does pay off. And I have like in me now this wisdom that I get to apply, and it creates benefit and relief for other people. And that makes me feel really good about myself. We are now at 27 seconds, so I think I'm going to call it.